All right, well, we have a live news feed for you coming in from Washington as the biannual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank gets underway. Our reporter Sherwin Bryce-Pease is standing by for us. He's going to try and possibly have a quick chat with the Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, who is leading the South African delegation to those biannual meetings. This is, of course, Nene's first visit to the gathering since being reappointed finance chief earlier this year after he was fired by the former President Jacob Zuma in December 2015. Let's go now to our Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Natasha. Welcome to one of the main venues here at the annual meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. We are awaiting the imminent arrival of Nhlanhla Nene, the Finance Minister. As you rightly point out, his first attendance of these annual meetings since his ouster by former President Jacob Zuma in December of 2015. He is about to chair a meeting of BRICS finance ministers. As SADC chair currently, he will also be chairing a meeting of SADC ministers here. And of course, the other big news is Reserve Bank Governor Lesedi Kganyago, who of course will be chairing his first meeting of the International Monetary and Financial Committee, essentially the most powerful steering committee made up of various member states that really influence the direction of policy that will be implemented by the Secretariat of the International Monetary Fund. Nhlanhla Nene, I will be looking over my shoulder from time to time to see if he arrives so that I can grab him for a quick word on his way in. But essentially, the focus is going to be on growth here. We saw the World Outlook report of the International Monetary Fund come out a few days ago, in which they upped South Africa's forecast to 1.5% growth for 2018, up from around 0.9% predictions late last year. And really the conversation point we want to have with the minister is about what President Cyril Ramaphosa has been saying at the Commonwealth Heads of Summits in London, talking about wanting to achieve growth at around 3%. 3%, of course, is a number we have not seen for a number of years in South Africa, and it's still well below the 5% that is stipulated in the National Development Plan, Natasha. So how do we move from what the IMF is saying, 1.5%, to what President Ramaphosa wants to achieve in terms of 3%? So growth is going to be a very important factor here in the days ahead.
Absolutely. And another important factor, I suppose, is there was a lot of talk ahead of this of us possibly needing a loan from the IMF. But I suppose the question now is, are we in a position to kind of say, well, we don't need a loan anytime soon?
It's interesting that you bring up the question of loans. My understanding is that the Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan, will also be attending these meetings. He has a meeting with the World Bank, according to Treasury officials, I understand, to discuss the loan that was granted to Eskom in 2010, the 3.75 billion loan, the first major contribution the World Bank has made to South Africa since democracy in 1994. And you might have seen, Natasha, reports in January earlier this year when Eskom dismissed the fact that the World Bank was thinking of recalling that $3.75 billion loan. So it's very interesting. We want to find out from Pravin Gordhan why he's here, what that discussion will entail. The Minister of Public Enterprise is also expected here in the days ahead. And of course, another big discussion point, Natasha, is this notion of protectionism. We've seen from the United States an increased idea that they want to look internally rather than expand externally. So one of the big topics here will be the steel tariffs that they're talking about, and a possible trade war with China, and how that dynamic between the two largest economies in the world will then influence this growth trajectory that we are now seeing. Remember, we're not talking about a recession anymore. We're talking about a 3.9% global growth over the next in the next 2 years. But there is some concern that post come 2020, there are some external factors that are going to start to weigh on this growth. And how is that then going to implement or impact the trajectory that President Ramaphosa seeks to achieve in terms of growth in South Africa? Remember, the world economy is now on an upswing, and South Africa is not taking full benefit of that upswing. If you look at countries like Ethiopia growing at 8.5%, Ghana is growing at close to 7% this year. South Africa has been stuck in this low growth trap for a number of years now. So there are external factors that one has to look at. The IMF also talking about the need for bottlenecks to be taken care of in terms of the restructuring of the South African economy. opening up sectors like telecommunications and transport. They talk about, yes, there's been political change and political uncertainty has perhaps gone away, but what about policy uncertainty? These are some of the issues that we'll be grappling with, certainly with the South African delegation in the days ahead.
Absolutely. And Sherwin, you mentioned Africa stuck in a low growth trap. And of course, President Ramaphosa is across the pond dealing with matters regarding the Commonwealth meetings that are currently going on. And he's been speaking there a lot about Africa's free trade deal. And one wonders if this sort of sentiment will be sold to the IMF meetings, if that's something that our South African delegation could bring up to delegates there.
Very much so, very much so. But the extent of trade that Africa can do with itself is not, in my estimation, going to break through the ceiling that many countries that are stuck, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, that are stuck in this low growth, that in terms of dealing with stubbornly high levels of unemployment, particularly in the youth category. You know, we see figures that in the segment of 15 years to 24 years, you're dealing with unemployment at around 50%. For youth in many of these countries. So African trade in and of itself is not going to deal with this. You need to look elsewhere. We need to be basically riding on the coattails of what we are seeing in the developed world. We're seeing strong growth in the United States. We've seen a recovery in the European Union. Japan is growing at a steady pace. We need to ensure that the demand that is being created in these growing economies factors into how we see growth in South Africa and certainly in the African continent. Natasha.
All right, Sherwin, we'll leave it here for now, but we'll go back to you as soon as you see Nhlanhla Nene, the Finance Minister, and try and doorstop him for a quick chat. Our Sherwin Bryce-Pease live for us from Washington, and this, of course, ahead of those IMF meetings. And we should be taking you live back to Washington, as we understand that IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde, she'll be giving some opening remarks at that gathering, and she should be giving, as Sherwin was indicating there, quite a broad overview of the world economy. So do stay tuned for that. We're expecting that to get underway around 2:45 this afternoon.